The fire is about to come here, so fast. He was surprised. Yes, the warrior replied briefly. Sorry. I didn't want to set fire to the whole village. The farmer broke down. Nothing happened, Egrin. You did well, and so we have to get out of here as soon as possible, before the army of these monsters finds out that we have escaped. A woman comforted him. I burned our village after all. Egrin continued to blame himself. So what? After all, we have to leave this place anyway. We won't be coming back here, said the woman. The man finally agreed with her. Yes, this is indeed true. We probably won't come back here, if these monsters will continue to plague our country. I don't want to interfere, but in my opinion we should be running away by now, noticed a girl, similar in age to Turhin. The team and the villagers noticed that the fire was about to reach them. Flee to the city by the lake. As I said, they should welcome you there, said the black-haired heroist to the elder of the village after a while. Thank you again for saving us, great Nanthonin. We will tell everyone of your courage and fortitude. Good luck in your further mission. The old man replied to him, and then in haste gave the order to march out to his men. Fast. The journey should not take us more than 7 hours if we hurry, he cried. The heroic team also set off and mounted their mounts hidden behind the boulders. I hope that the fire will finally stop, otherwise it will block our way to the capital, said a warrior, and then turned Nantha's head towards the burning fields. I guess you don't want to tell us that we have to go through this way. David was worried. Of course not. We have to bypass the village as soon as possible, because the fire can still get there. We better not delay. Hearing this, David calmed down a bit. Nanthonin drove forward, seeing that no one had anything left to say. Stay as far away from the village as possible. The giant simply advised them and directed the comrades to the left. The team stared in horror at the burning village and its entire area on the right. Although they were more than 100 meters away from it, even from this distance it was still possible to hear the squeaks and moaning of the burning goblins and wormers. David was getting better and better, seeing that they were moving further and further away from this place. Clouds of smoke covered the entire sky up and reached them. Unfortunately, but I'm afraid that the army of these monsters has already learned about our presence here, Nanthonin said suddenly. Why? How? David was surprised, as well as some of the others. Smoke can be seen from many kilometers, and the capital is only about half an hour drive away, the warrior explained. Right, the goblins must have already seen the fire in the distance. Papin nodded. That's bad. The enemy certainly does not know that we did it, but they will be vigilant and come here to see what happened. Nethin was concerned. Don't worry like that. In my opinion, this fire even came out for good. Some enemies will come out of the city to investigate the situation and look everywhere around the possible threat when we secretly break through the walls at night, Nanthonin replied, then unexpectedly plied a corn cob from the stem next to him and, to everyone's amazement, began to eat it, just as if it were not hard and raw at all. Celian looked at the warrior with a strange look, and then asked, So you want to tell us that we are going to sneak into the city when these monsters will be busy exploring the village and preparing? Exactly, Nanthonin nodded his head, still gnawing fresh corn. How can you eat it? After all, raw corn is hard as stone. David was surprised. Hard strengthens teeth, the warrior replied through the stuffed mouth. Ag. I understand, XD. The boy began to giggle quietly, hearing his answer. Nanthonin, however, did not pay any further attention to it, but kept pushing food into his mouth. After a while, he threw the stripped cob into the air and kicked it from the horse's back into the field. Then he looked ahead again and informed his comrades. We have to slowly get off the path before someone from the city sees us. Without a word of opposition, the team obediently directed the mounts to the right, following the warrior. They drove into one of the dense fields and after a while they went out the other side to a small pasture. Next to it was a wooden clay hut with burnt roof and broken windows. On the pasture in front of the house lay dead, decaying animals, such as cows and even chickens. It is certainly the work of these cowardly, brainless monsters, David guessed without any problems, unable to look at this unpleasant sight. The others also had no doubts as to who had done such a massacre, and numerous traces of the crime allowed to reconstruct the events that took place here. Traces of cattle hooves and human feet leading from the barn suggested that the host of this house probably wanted to chase the animals to escape. Unfortunately, no one and nothing survived anyway. On the wall of the hut there was a visible trace of already dried dark blood, and next to it lay on the grass a typically Athenian sword, with which the unfortunate man probably defended himself. It was possible to guess that the man clung to the wall and was surrounded by cruel monsters. The body, however, was nowhere to be seen. Nan Thornin carefully walked through the threshold of the breached door and entered the building. Immediately after him David entered, and a small room appeared before his eyes. Oddly enough, the room was not dirty. The wardrobe, table, chairs, bed and shelves were not even covered with dust. Some of the furniture was cluttered only with various things such as ropes, food or tools. "Something does not suit me here," Nathan said, pulling a sword out of his sheath. "Indeed," the warrior replied. The others nodded their heads in agreement with their comrades, until they suddenly froze in stillness, hearing a strange sound behind them. Bago jumped in terror, banging his head against the low ceiling until his entire hat crumpled. After a while, the sound was repeated again, but this time they recognized that it was meowing. The voice came from the cabinet next to the stove. Through the open door, suddenly, a ginger cat jumped out of it, holding a long piece of sausage in its mouth. "Oh, Coyote," Bago laughed with relief in his voice. The red-striped kitten slipped past the team, and then went his own way. David shook his head incredulously, seeing a cat that, passing by Little Poppin, reached almost to his knees. "And yet someone survived here," Caudrin said, looking at the cat. Nan Thornin again inspected the house, until he suddenly catched his eyes carefully on something, for he had just seen something very suspicious. "Look," said the giant, showing them a bowl of soup, fair, still warm. The warrior noticed, touching a hot vessel lying on the table. "We need to find out what everything is about," he said. "Yes. We need to see what's going on here. We are not alone here," nodded Poppin. "So we separate. We will explore the area around us in search of some clues," Nan Thornin said. "Seriously," David dallied, getting up from his chair. "And something does not fit you?" Nathan asked. The boy completely ghosted his companion, not answering his question. "You will divide into 4 groups," the giant recommended to them. The team hastily divided into 2-person groups. "And you are not going with us?" David asked the warrior. "I will continue to examine the house and the pasture, and you will delve a little deeper into the field. Maybe you will find something interesting," answered the warrior. "Okay, I'm going with Celian to the left, where we came from," said the David, after which everyone began to leave the house one by one. Bago and Tirefadin went south, passing Poppin and Caudrin, who chose the west. "Just don't go too far," Nan Thornin cried out to his departing friends, and then he looked over some simple grave that he had just found behind the house. Mudman and Tirefadin, meanwhile, entered a wheat field. Bago looked to the sides, and his companion looked under his feet, looking for any things. When they had walked somewhere about 50 meters, Tirefadin said, "Maybe we'd better turn back. Nan Thornin told us not to go too far away." "Just a moment, maybe something will pay found," Mudman replied, until suddenly out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a figure on the left. Bago poked the brown-haired man on the shoulder. Tirefadin looked up and also saw a figure approaching. Bago pulled out his long sword and shield if necessary. Seeing this, his companion did the same. Both of them squinted their eyes to take a closer look at the figure. It was difficult to tell if it was a man or a woman, but the person wore black pants, leather shoes, a white scarf on his or her face and a purple mantle with white sleeves. The outlander carried a pile of wood in his hands, but it was noticeable that he also carried a bow with a quiver and a long sword. After a while, Bago realized that the stranger was looking nervously to the sides, as if looking for a possible threat. Surely the fire in the distance alarmed this person. Bago wanted to fall on the ground, and not to be noticed, but it was too late. The stranger finally noticed a muddy man and a man in a woolen coat, so he immediately threw the wood to the ground and with a darting movement pulled out a bow, turning it several times in the air. The masked figure began to run towards them, stretching the bow for the shot. "Down!" Bago cried to his companion, although the woman or bowwoman was far away from them. 2 arrows stuck centrally into the center of the mudman's shield, as if the stranger wanted to make them aware of his accuracy aim. Bago screamed again, seeing the agility with which the stranger approached them, firing 2 arrows at once. "Let's run!" Tirefadin shouted. Bago put the shield back on his back so that his rear would be shielded from fire during the escape, and then ran after his companion. "Let's run, Stalin," Tirefadin advised again. Bago was about to nod his head, until suddenly a blue arrow with purple feathers stuck into his high hat. The headdress fell to the ground, so Bago hurriedly picked it up from the ground. "What are you doing? Run away!" Tirefadin cried, not intending to wait for the mudman. Bago put on his hat, looked back and called out to the figure chasing them. "To not shoot, they have no bad intentions," he cried. Hearing this, the stranger stopped for a moment, but after a while he grabbed another 2 shots and aimed the muddy between his legs, giving him enough warning, so Bago began to flee further, until they finally found themselves in the pasture. "Nanthonin," Bago cried out, breathless. "Some guy attacked us," Tirefadin added. Meanwhile, David and Celian returned. "What's going on?" asked the scout. "An archer attacked us. He saw us and immediately started shooting," Tirefadin replied. "What archer?" Nathan asked anxiously, leaning out with Turhin from behind the wall of the house. "I don't know. Tirefadin doesn't ethel. He shot from the hatch better than Celian," Bago shouted. Hearing this, the scout raised one eyebrow. "I highly doubt it." Everyone envied Celian archery, Caudrin said, bracing against the wooden wall of the house, until suddenly an arrow with purple feathers, millimeters from his nose, crashed into it. The long-haired halfling jumped instinctively back, screaming and rolling over on his back. "How dare you stay here? You'll better get out of here before I shower you with my arrows," suddenly said a young, female voice. The team looked in that direction and saw a girl in a purple mantle and a scarf masking her face. Her long, dark hair was braided together at the front into 2 braids, and at the back it was loosened. "Deel Voman, that didn't vanted to anything long," Bago said. "So what are you looking for here? How did you get here through the legions of these creatures?" The archer began to question them. There was silence. "Answer me immediately," girl shouted impatient. Then she grabbed her sword and axe, driven next to it, into a pile of wood. "And why should we tell you this? Who do you think you are? We came here just to help Ian." Celian did not finish his speech, because the masked girl grabbed the bow so quickly that her sword did not even have time to fall to the ground. "Well, what did you say? Who do I think I am? You'd better be careful what you say, because I'll hang you as soon as I get home," she screamed, then aimed at the scout, or rather almost aimed, because the arrow stuck centimeters above Celian's head. As she prepared for her next shot, Nanthonin stepped forward and covered the scout. When the girl managed to release the second arrow, the warrior simply reached his hand forward, and the arrow bounced off the iron spalder. The archer, a little surprised, looked at him, and when she saw the face of the warrior, her eyes were shaken. Nanthonin?" she asked. "Yes, princess, we came here to save your father," the giant replied. What? Began to scream incredulous Celian. The girl threw away her weapon and took off her mask, showing them a beautiful, but a little ungroomed face. Now everyone except David, who did not know her and, of course, Nanthonin, opened their mouths. The princess, who looked about 18 or 19 years old, felt a little uncomfortable seeing that everyone except the warrior was staring at her, as if with a dull look. After a while, she twitched, seeing a jumping scout landing to the ground, who fell to his knees in front of her. "Oh, your majesty, don't hang me, please, I beg you," Celian began to moan. "Be quiet." The girl got angry, shaking off the hands of the crying scout from her leg. Chapter 30. "We want to go to the capital at sunset. I hope that our hospitality here will not bother you," Nanthonin said to Princess Jalafessa. "Probably not, but there is a problem but this is not my real hiding place." Nathan wrinkled his forehead, and the others followed his example. "My friend, Farmer Tommy, lived here. When I fled the city with my maid and my teacher, Tommy was already dead. We buried him behind the house, and every now and then I come here for the necessary materials. This time I was lured here by this fire, but you have already told me that you have done it. I don't know how you managed to save all these prisoners," the girl replied, looking through the broken window. "I'm so sorry about your friend," said the warrior. Jalafessa just sighed. It was clear that he didn't want to talk about it anymore. "And if I can ask you, Jalafessa, I mean, your majesty, how exactly did you escape and where are your companions?" Celian asked. "I escaped a few months ago through the roofs of houses. We climbed the walls and jumped into the moat. Then we found a hiding place near to the Golden Beach, in a small cave. Unfortunately, my maid got sick and my master is probably taking care of her or fishing." "And what is your maid sick of?" Nanthornian asked. I do not know myself, but recently she has a very high fever and she cannot sleep due to coughing and headache, the archer replied. So we'll come to your hideout and see what can be done. At least we'll take our time, buy something and get ready, said the warrior. Thank you very much, great Nanthornian. You probably know how this simple maid comforted me and helped me after my mother's death. I'm not going to let her die from some illness, after all we've been through. Do not be afraid of your majesty. It is with great honor that I too will serve you and help you. I mean, we'll help unless, rather certainly we will help your friend. Nathan began to get tangled up with his tongue, and when he finished, he bowed quickly, clumsily, embarrassed. The princess, however, did not pay attention to the shyness and gawky situation of the boy, but she blushed and smiled, staring at the young man. And you are probably Lord Hendron's servant, she said, looking into his face. What? Oh, yes, that's me. Yes. Nathan was embarrassed, surprised that the king's daughter knew him. From where? I mean, your beauty. How do you know me? He stuttered further, in a trembling voice, feeling to his breakdown that he was also beginning to blush with shame. Celian looked at his friend with sincere compassion, seeing him trying not to look into Princess' face. I've heard something about all of you, the girl answered Nathan's question. But how do you know that, Majesty? After all, you hid for a long time in a remote area, Celian remarked. Nathan breathed with a sigh of relief, seeing that now the conversation will be conducted not by him, but by a scout. I've heard everything from these monsters. They talked about the destruction you wrought to them and how you destroyed the passages to the ancient mine. At first I didn't know if there was even a germ of truth in it, but I wanted to get to know these heroes. When I heard about Nanthornian, I already knew that it had to be true stories. So why did you shoot me from above, when I've asked one of Pose's hellos? Bago raised his voice rudely, angry at the king's daughter. However, the princess was not too offended by the mudman's inappropriate behavior. After months spent outside her palace, without a crown on her head, she no longer behaved as she had once behaved. During this time she learned not to exalt herself, although normally she would even have the right to punish mudman for not showing her due respect. Now, however, she understood the mudman's anger perfectly. I am sorry I wasn't so nice to you at the time, but first of all, I didn't know it was you, and secondly, I didn't want to kill you, I just wanted to chase you away, she replied at last. Some of it didn't look like that, Bago said. If I wanted to kill you, all your heads would have been shot through at least 2 arrowheads a long time ago, replied the archer, smiling sarcastically. May your majesty, if of course you will allow me, only tell us why you thought that we were enemies. If you've heard of us, why didn't you check first if it wasn't us? Tirefadin began to inquire calmly, playing with his beautiful, trim hair. I'm very sorry, but it didn't occur to me before that you could be the heroes. After all, I only saw 2 of you at the beginning. Until now, this place was visited by bandits only, and this fire, and to be honest, that's not how I imagined this brave team. No offense. Recently, there are a lot of such thugs who wanted to rob me, said the princess. And how do you know that all these people were thugs? Maybe they were stealing from you because they had to survive among those feral creatures. Maybe many of them also fled the capital. Why did you chase them away? Celian was surprised. I'm very sorry, but if you were me, you would do that too. That's the way the mob flops. You have to fight in need for every raw material you need, shelter or whatever you need. It's good that I've learned during those 2 months not to trust strangers. I have already met such a friend, who fortunately turned out to be a small problem, the princess replied again, saving her honor. What do you mean by that friend, lady? Papin asked. Not long after I ran out of city, I met a guy. He looked friendly and he said that he needed shelter, so I took him to my hiding place. For 2 days nothing happened and a bastard helped me, until he almost stole my food supplies. Thank to God, I found out in time that this deceived friend was an Isletian spy, so I put an arrow in his head before he could sneak out of the cave at night and escape with my supplies. Wait, what did you just say? What spy? Nathan became concerned, again eager to talk. Miranda can hide at least 2 troops of these abject Isletian pirates. As I said, one of them even had the pleasure of visiting me, sighed the girl. Well, no. That's Tornit, our eternal enemy within the walls of our city, and in addition this Mirentagon. Celian broke down. David grimaced. Recalling the demonic incarnation of Mirentagon, the boy tried to forget about the horrific scene again, when the evil ruler began to scream in a frenzy and disappeared inexplicably from his eyes. Meanwhile, Nathan began to say to the scout, "What were you so afraid of, Celian? There are reportedly only 2 troops of these Ascletians in the city." "I know, but I thought that we would only be dealing with these stupid monsters, and not these tribes from across the sea. Haven't you heard what this greedy, cruel nation is doing to people like us?" asked the scout his companion. "Nope, I haven't heard." "How's that you don't know? They take people and shoot them with cannons and their equalizers. Later, they tie the bodies to their ships so that they can be eaten by underwater beasts." Celian started screaming. "Do not overdo it. This is what only pirates banished by the waves do, not civilized Ascletians," Nathan said. But the princess was talking about pirate troops, not any civilized ones. "Ascletians," Celian remarked. "What is happening to you, Celian? Are you afraid of these pirates? You said recently that they are stupid, knowing shit about combat, cowardly villains." Nathan laughed. "Exactly. Villains. Do you want to know what this nation did with its former king?" "Nope, and I doesn't want to know," sighed the servant. "The son of Hiram Vagrants threw his own father off the throne, disguised him as a beggar and cut off his tongue. Then he threw him outside the city. Hiram's son later told the residents that his father was lost, and that wasn't all, Netin. After a few weeks, the slave hunters found the king in the forest and took him as a captive, not knowing that they were binding their own ruler," said the scout. "Come off it, they would immediately find out who he really is." Nathan burst out laughing. "You think that when the slave hunters saw in front of them a weak old man in rags who telling them that he is their king, they believed him? What am I saying? After all, he didn't have a tongue even then. He couldn't say anything to them. For almost 2 years now, the son who threw him out has been on the throne. Can you imagine that? In Ephinestra, such a thing would be unthinkable." The scout was still shouting. "It's a very interesting story, Celian, but it's time to get clogged mouth," Nathan replied solemnly. "But that's not everything that I want to." Celian did not finish, because he noticed that the Lord's servant was turning on his heel and taking something from the table. Nathan took the bottle of beer, taking cork, and he turned quickly towards the scout to put it in his mouth, as David had once done to him. Celian did not have time to react, and Nathan did not even aim him in the mouth, but straight in the face. The scout staggered in his chair, and when he regained his balance, he looked angrily at his companion holding a wooden cork. "What are you doing? Are you punching me in the face?" He was surprised and angry. "Don't get angry, I just wanted to clog you up." Nathan smiled goofily. "What? Excuse me, what?" Celian began to scream, jumping out of his chair. The princess didn't know what to think anymore. She honestly had doubts about whether she really saw in front of her this heroic team about which she had heard so much. Fortunately, Nanthonin separated the 2 young men before the scuffles began. "Stop now, behave like adults." The warrior raised his voice. "We'd better go to the hiding place, blank your tracks out," added the giant after a while, in a slightly calmer tone. Everyone without a word set about cleaning the hut so that no enemy would find out about their presence here. The team noticed that Jolifessa was also working, so Nanthonin told her that he didn't have to do it, but she only snapped her fingers at it, so the warrior decided not to interfere and helped her in her work. After several minutes of carefully covering their tracks, they finished and went outside. "There is no need to clean up here. I made a special mess here so as not to arouse suspicion," the princess pointed out, pointing to dead animals and burnt timbers. "Do you mean that you killed these animals just to make the enemy think there's nothing left to do here?" Celian was surprised, raising his voice unintentionally. "I didn't say that I killed them. I only moved the bodies from the fields so that the goblins and the wormers thought that this place had long been plundered and there was nothing to look for here." Jalifessa was outraged. "Exactly, you clot." Nathan laughed, straight to Celian's face. The scout gave him only a sinister smile and then pulled out a wooden cork from behind his green coat. "Revenge is mine," he mumbled, and just as he was about to pounce on the young man dressed in chainmail, Nanthonin simply tore the cork out of his fingers and as if nothing happened, he had just put it in his shoes, whistling in the same time. "Oh, have you seen that? The cork is gone. Such a magic," he said, pretending to be very surprised. Celian did not answer, but the expression on his face was clearly outraged. "Enough of these antics. Get on the horses immediately and off you go." said the warrior again, no longer enthusiastically. The team moved without a word towards the mounts. Hearing David giggling along the way, the warrior helped the princess climb on the black, muscular steed, and he himself decided to go on his own foot, leading the mount for the bridle. The others also settled the horses and set off in the direction indicated by the princess, that is to the south. They came out of the pasture and entered a wheat field, illuminated by the golden afternoon sun. Yellow ears waved in the wind like a sea, making an amazing impression. After about 10 minutes, a large, ruined windmill appeared before their eyes, without a single propeller. After a while, the team went out on the grass again, and the sound of water reached their ears. David guessed that it must be a river, behind which Jellyfess's hiding place would probably already be located. His assumptions were confirmed after a short time, when they finally saw a torrential river, and behind it a small hill, hidden behind trees. He could also see the golden beach, which in the light of the sun actually looked like pure gold. "Unfortunately, but I'm afraid we can't take horses with us," said the princess. "Little wonder, how do you get to the other side of the bank, princess?" Nanthornian asked, in an easy but risky way. Jellyfessa replied, pointing to a tree a little below the hill. The team jumped off the horses and descended with the mounts carefully, closer to the shore. The archer led them to a large tree and pulled out a green-dyed, thick rope, from the creepers growing on them. "Not bad hidden, it looks like one of the creepers," David said quietly. The girl grabbed the rope tightly, long, almost like a tree itself. She went back upstairs, stepped back and jumped from the rune up over the river cliff. She flew low over the river, trying not to let go of the rope by accident. When the rope was about to go backwards, she quickly let go and fell from a height of several meters to the other bank of the river. "It looks like I'm going to be playing Tarzan here," David thought, but he didn't laugh at all, because he knew that every slightest mistake, or even a moment of hesitation, could be fatal to say the least. "So who is the turn now?" Nanthornian asked his comrades. David breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that he was already falling to the ground. At first he was very afraid, but later he dared to fly across the river as the penultimate one. He only got his feet wet, because when he was already by the water, he almost let go the rope because of his fear. The boy looked back again to see how Nanthornian would cope with the obstacle with his dislocated hand. The warrior led his steed by the rocks, where the others hid the rest of their horses, then went to the tree and grabbed a rope. He climbed a steep hill and walked away as much as he could. David stepped back on the other side because he didn't want to take any risks. He knew what this giant was capable of. The warrior also climbed a nearby boulder to fly even further, then jumped down and began to run towards the river. When he was right in front of a cliff, he bounced off the ground and stretched his legs forward to accelerate better. The giant took such a run that the rope he was holding flew with him upwards, so he let go and flew to the ground, above the heads of his comrades. Although he fell from about 5 meters, he landed like a cat, just on its feet and turned to them on his heel. "Ingenious passage, Your Majesty." He turned to Jellyfessa, then looked at the rope, which stopped again in its place, on the other bank. Then he looked south again and pointed to the hill and tree in front of them. "I think that you are coming back similarly to this side of the shore," he said more than he asked. "Of course, there is a second rope." The princess pointed to another green cord hanging by a branch. "Here you can really invite Isletians. That would be a lot of fun for them," Nethin said. "That what?" Celian was surprised. "Well, Isletian pirates get to enemy ships in a similar way," Nethin explained. "So go ahead, invite these pirates here. We will see how they repay us for the hospitality," joked the scout, but he was not at all to laugh. "So let's go upstairs," the princess said after a while, breaking the short-lived silence. They all obediently followed the princess. When they finally reached the top, trees appeared before their eyes, covering the entrance to a small stone cave. Interestingly, the grotto even had a makeshift door made, through which a pale, faint light penetrated through. "My Tekaharin is probably cooking something," Jellyfessa said, inviting the team inside with a hand gesture. As they approached the hole door made of 3 boards, rattan bark and a few sticks, they could smell the roasted meat. "I'm back," the girl cried out so that no one inside would have any doubts who was coming. She opened or rather pulled the door apart and entered us first. "So fast," said a male voice inside. "I was gone for a few hours, not happy. I also have a little surprise with me," the princess replied, jumping inside and turning backwards. The team standing outside noticed that Jellyfessa had nodded slightly. so they guessed they could come in. Bago, feeling the smells coming from inside, pushed forward, and when he crossed the threshold of the door, they heard a monstrous scream. Muddy saw a light-haired man jumping to his feet and screaming. Jolifesa tried to calm him down, but the man grabbed the knife with which he had just peeled the vegetables collected from the field. Harin, calmly, he is not the enemy, the princess shouted to the man, pointing to the embarrassed mudman. Did they follow you? What have you done? Kill him. Harin continued to scream, not paying attention to what the girl was telling him. Nope, no, Master Harin, these are friends, I took them here, said the princess, tugging the man in all directions. Harin finally calmed down and realized what the princess was saying. So this is your surprise? Did you say friends? So there are more of them? The fair-haired man began to question, putting the knife on the ground. Yes, there are more of them, the princess replied briefly, and once she said so, the rest of the team spilled out of the door. Seeing this, Harin let out a kind of muffled cry. 9 strangers, hidden in the twilight of the cave, approached the campfire. Harin looked at their faces and fixed his gaze on the muscular warrior. Nan Thornin? Harin asked hesitantly. The warrior did not answer, but nodded barely visibly. I am very sorry. Lately I haven't seen any normal people besides my companions. Forgive, I'm starting to go crazy. I think I have some seduces. The man began to mumble. Nothing happened, Harin, Nan Thornin replied, as if with seriousness in his voice. I forgot that you exist at all, Nan Thornin. I forgot to even introduce myself to you, Harin continued quietly. You don't have to introduce yourself anymore. We know your name, and I have just spoken to you by name, said the giant with a slight smile. Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm very tired. Have you seen a man named Metkel? Did he send you to us? This is such a long-haired, blonde man who commands several troops in the Eternal Camp, the man mumbled weakly. Metkel, we know him well, David said. Hearing this, Harin finally smiled, as if returning to life. After a while, however, the smile disappeared again without a trace. But he's not with you right now. Excuse, Metkel won't listen to me anyway. I don't want to talk about it. I will take the food to Jelith, he said, pointing to a sick woman, sleeping on a mattress, in a dark corner. Nan Thornin agreed with a nod, so Harin took a bowl of meat and a primitive salad made from vegetables only. He put the food on a table made of sticks, next to the bed of an elderly person. As he did it, he froze motionless and watched, standing stiffly, at the sick Jelith. He stood there for almost a minute until he finally turned towards the team, which was trying to fit in a cramped cave. If you know Metkel, maybe I will confess to you what tires me, maybe he will listen to you. I will tell you this, however, provided that you promise me something, said the fair-haired man in a navy blue coat. Everyone except the sleeping maid turned into hearing. David in particular was interested. So, did that Metkel tell you something about me? Harin asked at the beginning. He didn't tell me anything about you, David replied, who knew that warrior well. It was predictable. Can you promise me that you will make him realize that it was not my fault? Harin said. But what, not your fault? What do you mean? Jalifesa was surprised. Metkel was my friend and teacher, Harin began to say. The princess encouraged the man to keep talking, nodding. So a scout named Serema lost his dog, or more precisely, a wolf, just before what happened here. The man again fell silent for a moment, wondering what to say. Well, when this scout and Metkel decided to make it up years later, because they have always been enemies, the scout's dog, his dog died. I mean a wolf. Harin fell silent again. And what's next? What do you mean by that? You never talked about it, encouraged Jolifesa. The man sighed and began to continue talking, sitting by the fire. Well, this dog died by a forest monster, such a bear living near to Mount of Natha. This aggressive beast is probably still alive and has destroyed my whole life. The man broke down at the end, banging his hand on the table. Did you say bear? David and Celian asked at the same time. Yes, and what? Harin mumbled. Did this forest beast kill this dog near the Eternal Camp? Was it all scarred on the body? Celian began to question him. Yes. Exactly, but what does that have to do with the price of fish? Harin replied, looking up at the two young men. So apparently the same beast attacked David and Metkel while hunting. Anyway, me too, when I wanted to help them, Celian said seriously. So you killed that bear? Harin asked, Nope. That beast was killed by a lumberjack named Maleficent. David replied this time. I understand, Harin said briefly, again with his head down. Can you tell us what happened next? The princess asked him. The man sighed again, then replied, so this beast attacked this dog. He saved me when the beast wanted to get me from behind. I wounded the bear with a spear, so it ran away. The dog was still alive and saved me, but I didn't even know him. I thought it was an ordinary wild wolf. Something in my head told me to put an end to the suffering of this animal, because it had pierced lungs, so I grabbed the knife. The rest does not need to be told to you. I'll just say also that Metkul had to come and he said that I had killed the dog, because you killed. David said, yes. But he thought I had killed the dog myself, that I wanted to kill him only for skin and meat, thinking that he was an ordinary wolf. I even told Metkul that the dog had saved me, and I just wanted to relieve him, but he didn't believe me. He blamed me all the time, and it was all his fault. The scout, as it turned out, gave Metkul a dog to guard him, and he didn't even take care of him. When the scout found out about the death of the pet, he began to question us. We told our versions of events, but it contradicted each other. I said it was Metkul's fault, and Metkul thought I was the one who killed the dog, so Sarimwa decided that we were both lying, but he only knew my teacher, so he suspected him. He kicked him so much that he broke Metkul's ribs. He started screaming that he was disappointed in him and would split his head the next time. Then he betrayed the dog and promised himself that he would ruin Metkul's life and persecute him as he had done for what he had done to him. Harin fell silent again, and the listeners decided that this was the end of the story. A very strange story. Somehow I do not want to believe in it. After all, if this wolf was attacked by a bear, it had to leave traces of teeth on the pet leather. If your teacher and scout had seen it, they would probably have believed your version of events. After all, I don't think the dog owner hates this whole Metkul so much, Tirefadin interjected. And you know those two. Harin got angry. I'm just saying what I think about it. I don't know why you told us this story, but it's just weird to me, replied calmly beautiful-haired man. And I believe you. I know Sarimwa and Metkul. I'm a scout myself, Celian said. Really? So Sarimwa is your teacher? Harin asked. Nope. Rather, he's just my boss, Celian replied. I believe you, Harin, because I know Sarimwa inside out, added the scout. So can you say something about him? Asked politely fair-haired man. Of course. To begin, I can say that I am not at all surprised why Sarimwa is as is. Saying this, the scout took on a gloomy expression on his face. As you probably already know, Sarimwa and Metkul hated themselves since they were children. The real hatred, however, came much later, when my master lost his wife and children, and as it now turned out, this wolf, his despair and anger intensified. Since the death of his family, Sarimwa has become unfried, not only to Metkul, but also to others. Since then, I have not seen him look any woman in the eye. He considers all the children as a stupid brats, and humiliates everyone in our reconnaissance unit. I remember when he was once a good leader, but unfortunately he himself probably forgot about it, Celian said grimly, with his head down. Sarimwa had a wife and children, yelled Turhan suddenly, who knew more or less Sarimwa and admired his archery abilities. The boy, as an orphan working in the Eternal Camp, also had the opportunity to help the bowmaster in preparation for various shooting competitions, where he learned to shoot well from a slingshot by the way. Yes, but I prefer not to tell you how his family died. Answer the question of the boy Celian. There was silence. David began to eat food that had already cooled down, while he was immersed in listening to an interesting story. For a long time, only his smaking could be heard, until Nanthonin began to speak. Maybe I'd better check what Jellyf's condition is. After all, that's what we came here for. Saying this, he turned towards the older woman, and with him the others. They saw, however, that Jellyf was no longer asleep, but was finishing eating the meat on the table. The woman must have listened to their entire conversation, and they didn't even notice when she woke up. It was an interesting and at the same time sad story. She spoke to them with a radiant smile. She rested her hands on a black skirt with an apron as she put down the empty bowl and she leaned back more comfortably. How do you feel? Jalifessa asked her. Getting better, but unfortunately still bad, answered the woman who once served the young princess herself. That's good news anyway, Harin said with a smile. The legendary Nanthonin came here. I mean, just Nanthonin. I think he can at least find out what's wrong with your health. the princess told to the woman. As she said this, a warrior approached the bed with a barely visible, gloomy smile on his face. "I see that you don't look your best yourself," Jelif said, seeing a powerful, but at the same time dirty warrior with his hand in a primitive plaster cast. Nanthaornin, however, did not pay attention to it, but without a word he got to work. He touched her forehead, looked at her reddened eyes, and told her to cough several times. He put wet cloth on her inflamed fever head, and later he ordered a sick woman to make strange noises such as blowing and breathing. "What does he do?" Celian was surprised to see all this. "Don't worry, Nanthaornin certainly knows what he's doing. Apparently, every heroist goes through medical practice," Nathan replied. "Really? And we scouts didn't have such lessons," Celian said. "You had. It's just that apparently Serema didn't want to accept you into them. He told me that he once referred you special to Sonovit's doctor for a while so that you could learn something from him. Then, the doctor asked you for aloe vera ointment, and you, Buhaha." Nathan burst out laughing at the very end. What do you mean?" The scout was outraged. "And you gave him soap to the doctor?" "Ha, ha, ha," laughed the fair-haired young man. "That was years ago. I was still a kid, a student. I didn't even know what aloe vera was. After all, this plant grows far to the north," Celian justified himself. Hearing this, Nathan only laughed more. His laughter turned into a strange snort, and his eyes began to tear. Meanwhile, Nanthaornin finished his research and looked at Nathan with a scolding look. The young man who saw it stopped laughing at once. The warrior, seeing that Nathan has calmed down, thought that he finally can describe Jelif's condition to the princess. "I think I know what your friend is sick of, your majesty." "What? Already? Did you find out it so quickly?" Celian asked incredulously, not asked to talk. So Nanthaornin gave him also a hostile look, seeing that the princess also wanted to ask something. So Nanthaornin made sure that no one else would disturb, and then signaled to Jalithessa that she could speak in peace. "Is this something very bad? What exactly is it?" asked the girl. "Fortunately, it's nothing serious. This is just a disease called Valini, which comes from moisture. No wonder. Your hiding place is right next to the river, and the cave is dripping with all the water. This is why Jelif has such a wrinkled skin," Nanthaornin replied. "Disease from moisture? What is it at all?" David asked. "Never mind. In your world it is called differently," the giant replied quietly. Chapter 31. "Why do I have to stay here? I really cannot go with you, Nanthaornin." David was outraged when he heard the warrior's unpleasant order that he, along with Derefadin, Celian, Bago, and Turhin, wait hidden and take care of Jelif. "We can't all enter the city at once. We will be too conspicuous. In addition, you can patrol the area," Nanthaornin said. David incredulously looked out of the tall grass and looked at the huge fortifications of the capital and the walls made of large, white blocks. "I came here with the hope that I would be useful in something, and you say in front of the gate that I must stay here with others?" "Unfortunately, yes," Heroest replied briefly. David snorted in response, as if disregarding what the black-haired warrior was saying. Nanthaornin, however, did not pay attention to the boy's rude behavior. He arose only from the ground and said to the other 5 people. "So David will be here to command you now, clear? If someone doesn't like it, let them say." David, who hears this, snort again, as if with miserable amusement. "On the one hand, you are afraid to take me to the city, but on the other hand, you suddenly appoint me commander. Very funny." Nanthaornin nodded affirmatively. "I have my reasons," he said, and then again he leaned to the little friend. "It just so happens that your name itself means commander. You probably didn't even know it," added the warrior with a smile. "What does my name mean?" "What, commander?" The boy was surprised. "Every name means something, almost everyone. I am Nanthaornin, mysterious, and you are David, commander," said the blue-eyed giant, and then straightened up again. "Don't worry, when we leave, I'll tell you what to do next," he added quietly after a while, turning on his heel and moving with others towards the city. What did you say?" "Wait, how do you tell me? How? What will you tell me? How?" David began to scream, not understanding the mysterious man. Nanthaornin did not answer, but continued to walk slowly towards the walls about 25 meters high. The boy, seeing that the warrior was no longer going to speak, began to wonder what the man meant. He said, "When we leave, I'll tell you what to do, David said to himself, not understanding. Then he returned to the other 5 companions and sat on the ground next to Celian. What are you doing? He asked when he saw that the scout was laying wood. I want to make a bonfire, replied the comrade. Ag, that's cool. What, make a bonfire? These monsters will notice us, shouted David at the very end, scattering the laid wood in all directions. And how do we warm up in that case? Asked the scout. We have a lot of blankets. They left them to us especially on the ground to keep us warm, idiot. I thought that every scout knew what the danger of lighting a fire in the middle of the night could be, where only those goblin brainless creatures lurked around, said the fair-haired boy. Since these goblins are brainless, as you say, they shouldn't notice the fire, Celian joked. The real prankster is there, David sighed. You heard Nanthonin. I'm in command here, so you don't have the right to light a bonfire, understood? Quieter. You both, they can hear us, Terhin said. You are right. David admitted, then handed 2 dirty blankets to Celian, 2 for each, and you have to stay awake. Maybe in a few hours we will at most change guards, but now let everyone keep their eyes open, David said, this time in a whisper. He lined the bare ground with grass and sat on it, making himself a backrest from a high boulder. He looked up, watching the half-moon. Everywhere around him were constellations of stars unknown to him, or so he thought, because he didn't know much about the night sky. He lay there for several minutes, until suddenly his eyes began to squint. He shook himself to chase away the drowsiness, but it was not easy. Suddenly, he felt very tired after days of wandering, until he suddenly fell asleep and didn't even know when it happened. For the first time in his life, the boy felt such a strong desire to sleep, as if his body itself immediately forced him to do so. Of course, at first he only napped, but after a while he fell into such a deep sleep that he began to snore only after a minute, after closing his eyes. David, David, David. The boy suddenly heard a familiar voice, echoing with a strange echo. David opened his eyes and rose from the ground. As he did it, the stars in the sky began to fall downwards, and the black sky gradually began to take on different shades of purple. From behind the horizon emerged from 2 sides at the same time the moon and the sun, which illuminated everything as if with a blue glow, resembling rays, like the blue aurora borealis. When everything had been illuminated by this strange light, David felt a sudden frost and saw that he was now on a snow-covered hill. A frosty, pinching wind hit him, so David wrapped himself in the grey blanket he had with him and pulled the hood, which through a storm and stinging snowflakes swept it out of his head anyway. The boy began to look around, looking for any signs of life. Unfortunately, he found nothing but only dazzling whiteness, which hurt his eyes. David, 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 a familiar voice spoke again. Nanthonin, is that you? Where are you? What is going on? David began to cry out, taking air into his lungs, because wind blowing in his face did not even allow him to breathe normally. Suddenly, he noticed a human silhouette in front of him, half visible through a blizzard. David began to walk towards the figure. When he was close, he no longer had any doubts about who this person was. What's going on here, Nant? What's going on here? Where are we? The boy began to ask, dressed in a new, furry robe warrior. I came to you because I want to talk to you, Nanthonin said. Okay, but what's the point? What are we doing in this white hole? David tried to shout out the noise and whistled wind. Relax. Don't you think this is really happening? Asked the black-haired warrior. Well, no, rather not, but I am in a dream. After all this is so real here. I've never felt so cold like this before. What is happening to this sky? The whole sky glows with a strange glow, and the earth is literally too white. I guess I am about to go blind, David said. Don't worry. Even if you were blind here, nothing will happen to you in reality, Nanthonin joked. Very funny, David replied briefly, who was not laughing at all, especially in this strange situation. Suddenly, the boy pointed out that the warrior no longer had his arm dislocated. Already healthy? He simply asked, not too surprised, for he had seen less real things than the mysterious recovery of Nanthonin's hand. For weeks spent in this world, unreal things became real to him. You are in a dream. I think I have the right to have a healthy hand now, Nanthonin replied with a smile to the 13-year-old boy. Of course you have the right, David replied. The only interesting thing is that I am supposedly in a dream, but I can still say what I want and do what I want. Can you explain this to me logically? The boy asked after a while. We are in your imagination and dreams, David, Nanthornin replied. That what? That what this? That is, that. I did not imagine this white hole and not imagine it. This is a dream, not imagination, the warrior corrected him. Let it be. I just don't grasp what a dream it must be, in which I can do whatever I like. Look, I can lift this snow of my own free will, David said. Then he slid over to pick up the cold, white fluff. He dug it up, but instead of melting in his warm hand, the white snow in his hand suddenly turned into a red fire. David began to yell like a possessed, releasing fire from his hand as if it were just a simple hot ball. The fireball crashed into the snow, then turned into ice again. The boy looked at the ground and dead stop, then jumped to his feet and began to yell at Nanthornin's face. The warrior began to shake the boy to calm him down. David finally stopped shaking and screaming. Can we finally get to the point? Asked the warrior in blue robes. I think so. I mean, I guess yes, but yes. Joy began to speak like a mad. He standing stiffly like a pole. It's just a dream. You have nothing to fear. After all, you have dreamed strange things more than once. For example, when you went to school and saw a big camp there instead. Nanthornin said. How do you know? Did I dream of such a thing? Wait. David began to remember a strange dream from years ago. You met a tall man in this camp with black hair, a beard and blue eyes, the warrior reminded him. Hearing this, David slowly raised his gaze to look his friend straight in the face. Nope, no, it's after all, that was you? The boy began to stutter. You have a good memory, boy, truly. You dreamed to me so long ago, and I didn't notice it. David was surprised. People do not pay much attention to dreams, or do not know their meaning and forget them. Once, when you dreamed of this eternal camp, you did not pay attention to it, but now you immediately remembered it. The warrior replied. It's very astonishing, said the boy, not knowing what to answer. You're about to freeze. Come, I wanted to show you something, said the warrior, pulling him to himself to make him warmer. They both began to walk uphill, completely covered with mysterious snow. Are we going to the very top? Is it far away? The boy asked after a while. Nope. It's close. Look, Nanthornin pointed out the barely visible outline of the top of the mountain. As they climbed to the top, David was surprised to see that everything was just white here too.